From the outside, Natalie's life looked like a dream. She lived in a spacious suburban home with her husband Greg and their 2 children, Lily and Noah. The house was always pristine, the garden well maintained, and Natalie was the epitome of a devoted wife and mother. She started her days early, preparing breakfast for the family, ensuring the kids were ready for school, and keeping the house running like clockwork. To the neighbors, Natalie was the definition of having it all, but behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. Greg was a successful businessman who worked long hours and prided himself on providing a luxurious lifestyle for his family. However, his constant focus on his career left little room for appreciation of Natalie's efforts. While he enjoyed the benefits of her labor, Greg often dismissed her contributions. To him, Natalie's role as a housewife was secondary to his position as the breadwinner. Over time, his dismissive remarks became more frequent, and Natalie found herself questioning her worth. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Greg offhandedly remarked, "It must be nice to have nothing to do all day." The words stung more than Natalie cared to admit. She forced a smile, unwilling to let the children sense her hurt, but inside, her emotions churned. She had sacrificed her career, her aspirations, and even parts of her identity to support their family. Yet, Greg's words made her feel invisible, as if her contributions were insignificant. Natalie hadn't always been a housewife. Before meeting Greg, she was a talented graphic designer with a promising career ahead. But when they decided to start a family, she made the choice to step away from her profession, believing it was the best decision for her children. At first, Greg seemed supportive, but as years passed, his respect for her decision eroded. The woman who once felt proud of her role now felt like a shadow of her former self. As Natalie cleared the dinner table that night, Greg's words echoed in her mind. She looked at her hands, calloused from years of hard work that no one seemed to notice. Something inside her stirred, a small but growing voice that whispered, "You are more than this." Greg's dismissive attitude wasn't new, but it was becoming increasingly hard for Natalie to ignore. Small comments here and there had started to add up. Whenever he returned home, his first words were often criticisms about the house not being as tidy as he expected or complaints about dinner not being special enough. His words came without acknowledgement of the effort Natalie put into running their household seamlessly. Natalie often tried to brush off Greg's remarks, telling herself he was stressed from work. But deep down, she knew his disdain wasn't just about work. Greg seemed to genuinely believe that because she didn't contribute financially, her role was less valuable. On particularly bad days, he would joke, "I'm the CEO of this house, and you're just the unpaid intern." The words cut deeper than he realized, but Natalie kept silent to avoid escalating the tension. Their relationship had once been filled with laughter and understanding. Greg used to be her biggest supporter, encouraging her dreams and marveling at her creativity. Now, it felt as though they were living parallel lives, connected only by their children and shared obligations. Natalie missed the days when Greg would hold her hand, look into her eyes, and tell her she was the most incredible woman he'd ever met. But those moments were now rare, overshadowed by his constant dismissiveness. One evening, Greg came home with an air of excitement, holding an embossed invitation. "It's the company gala next weekend," he announced, handing the card to Natalie. "You'll need to get something decent to wear. You know, something that doesn't scream housewife." His words were laced with a joking tone, but the underlying jab was clear. Natalie swallowed her pride and smiled, masking the hurt that swelled in her chest. She had always disliked these events, not because she didn't enjoy dressing up, but because Greg's colleagues often mirrored his condescending attitude. They saw her as nothing more than Greg's accessory, a quiet wife who smiled politely and stayed out of the way. Yet, she knew refusing to go would only lead to another argument. That night, as she tried on old dresses in front of her mirror, Natalie caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. The spark in her eyes had dimmed, and the confident woman she once was felt like a distant memory. She sighed deeply, determined to get through the night for Greg's sake. Little did she know, the gala would be a turning point in her life, one that would force her to reevaluate everything she believed about herself. The gala was held at an opulent ballroom downtown, filled with Greg's colleagues and their impeccably dressed spouses. Natalie felt out of place from the moment she stepped in, her modest dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns around her. Greg, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the spotlight, laughing and chatting with his coworkers as if he were the star of the show. During dinner, one of Greg's colleagues commented on how lucky Natalie was to have such a successful husband. "Must be nice not having to work," the woman said, her tone dripping with condescension. Before Natalie could respond, Greg chuckled and added, "Well, someone's got to take care of the house, right? Otherwise, what would she even do all day?" The table erupted in polite laughter, but Natalie felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Unable to bear the humiliation, Natalie excused herself and retreated to the restroom. As she splashed cold water on her face, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, tears threatening to spill. "This can't be my life," she whispered to herself. The once confident designer was now a woman who felt invisible in her own marriage. Something had to change. The car ride home was silent. Natalie stared out the window, replaying the events of the evening in her mind. When they arrived home and the children were tucked into bed, she finally broke the silence. "Why do you talk about me like that in front of people?" she asked, her voice trembling. Greg, who was scrolling through his phone, looked up with mild annoyance. "Talk about you like what?" "Like I'm nothing. Like I don't matter," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Greg sighed, clearly irritated. "Oh, come on, Natalie. You're overreacting. It was just a joke." "It didn't feel like a joke," she replied. "Do you even realize how much I sacrifice for this family?" "For you?" Greg rolled his eyes. "Sacrifice? Natalie, I'm the one paying the bills. I'm the one keeping this family afloat. What exactly do you think you're sacrificing?" Those words cut deeper than Natalie thought possible. She stood there, frozen, as Greg walked away. That night, as she lay awake in bed, she realized something needed to change, not just in their marriage, but within herself. That night, Natalie stared at the ceiling in their darkened bedroom, her mind spinning with thoughts she had buried for years. Greg's words replayed over and over like a cruel mantra, each repetition chipping away at the fragile foundation of her self-esteem. Was this all her life would ever be? She had always told herself that being a mother and wife was the greatest calling, but now she wasn't sure if that belief was hers or one imposed by others. Her mind drifted to the days before marriage, when she was a young graphic designer brimming with ambition. Back then, she spent long hours in a small studio, her fingers flying across sketchpads and keyboards as she poured her soul into every design. The rush of meeting deadlines, the thrill of creating something meaningful, it was a part of her identity she had almost forgotten. Now, even the thought of sitting at a computer for her own passion felt alien. Natalie's gaze shifted to the soft moonlight spilling through the window. She realized that while she had dedicated herself to her family, she had neglected someone equally important, herself. For the first time in years, a flicker of anger stirred within her, not at Greg, but at herself for letting her dreams slip away. "You are more than this," she whispered to the darkness, clutching the bedsheet as if holding on to that thought for dear life. The next morning, as Natalie went about her routine, she received an unexpected message on her phone. It was from Laura, her college friend and former coworker. The message was simple: "Hey, Nat. I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you'd like to help me with a freelance project. Your design work was always amazing, and I could really use your touch." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. It had been years since anyone had mentioned her skills, let alone asked for her help. She reread the message several times, torn between excitement and doubt. Could she still do it? Would she even remember how? As much as she longed to say yes, fear of failure held her back. But as the day wore on, she found herself drafting a cautious reply: "Hi, Laura. It's so good to hear from you. I'd love to hear more about the project. Let me know what you need." Later that evening, as Natalie prepared dinner, a sense of anticipation replaced her usual monotony. She hadn't told Greg about the message, something in her gut told her not to. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of the person she used to be. That night, Laura called to explain the project. It was a branding campaign for a local boutique looking to refresh its image. As Laura outlined the work, Natalie jotted down notes, her hands trembling with nervous energy. When Laura finished, there was a pause. "So, what do you think?" Laura asked, her voice warm and encouraging. Natalie hesitated. "It sounds amazing. But, Laura, it's been so long. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this anymore." "Natalie," Laura said firmly, "I remember the work you did back in college. You have an eye for design that can't be taught. This boutique is looking for something personal, something meaningful, and that's what you do best. Trust me." Laura's words filled Natalie with a tentative confidence. She agreed to take on the project, promising herself she'd give it her best effort. After the call ended, Natalie sat at the dining table, staring at the blank sketchpad in front of her. Slowly, she picked up a pencil and began to draw. The lines were shaky at first, but as her ideas took shape, she felt a long dormant part of her waking up. Over the next week, Natalie worked on the project in secret, carving out time late at night after the kids were asleep. Greg often fell asleep on the couch watching TV, which gave her the solitude she needed. Her dining table became her makeshift workstation, littered with pencils, markers, and sheets of paper. She poured herself into the designs, losing track of time as she rediscovered her passion. At first, the process was frustrating. She felt out of practice, her ideas disjointed and her execution clumsy. But as the nights went on, the lines grew cleaner, the colors more vibrant. She found herself smiling as she worked, a feeling of accomplishment swelling within her. For the first time in years, Natalie was creating something for herself. One night, Lily wandered into the kitchen to get a glass of water and caught her mother bent over her sketches. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked sleepily. Natalie hesitated, unsure how to explain. Then she smiled and said, "Just something for a friend, sweetie. Go back to bed." Lily nodded and shuffled back to her room. As Natalie watched her daughter leave, she realized that this wasn't just about herself, it was about setting an example for her children, showing them the importance of following their passions. The day Natalie submitted her first design, her stomach churned with nerves. She sent the files to Laura with a note, "I hope this works. Let me know what you think." Then she waited, checking her email obsessively every few minutes. When Laura's reply finally came, Natalie's heart raced. The message was short but effusive. "Natalie, this is stunning. It's exactly what the client wanted. You still have it, don't doubt yourself. I can't wait to show them." Natalie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of validation that no amount of housework or parenting could provide. She glanced at the clock, realizing it was nearly midnight, and decided to reward herself with a cup of tea. As she sat in the quiet kitchen, sipping her drink, a sense of peace washed over her. She wasn't just a housewife, she was Natalie, and she was capable of so much more. As the days turned into weeks, Natalie found herself juggling more than she had in years. Between the freelance work for Laura and her duties as a mother and wife, her schedule grew tighter. She woke early to make breakfast, helped the kids with their homework in the evenings, and then worked on her designs late into the night. The exhaustion was real, but so was the satisfaction. For the first time in years, Natalie felt alive. Greg began to notice the subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more energetic, even cheerful, despite the long days. "You've been acting strange lately," he remarked one evening, his tone skeptical. "What's got you in such a good mood?" Natalie brushed off the comment, mumbling something about reading a good book. She wasn't ready to share her secret yet, especially not with someone who had made her feel so small. Despite the heavy workload, Natalie cherished the late nights spent at her makeshift workspace. She found solace in the quiet hours when the world was asleep. Every new design she completed felt like a small victory, a reminder of the woman she used to be, and the woman she was rediscovering. One afternoon, Laura called Natalie with exciting news. "The boutique absolutely loves your work," she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. "They've even asked if you'd be open to taking on a larger project, something long-term." Natalie's heart raced. The idea of committing to more work thrilled and terrified her. Could she handle the additional responsibility? "That's incredible," she replied cautiously. "But, are you sure I'm the right person?" "Natalie," Laura said firmly, "you're exactly the right person. They were blown away by your creativity. They even said it gave their brand a fresh identity. This is your chance to shine." Hanging up the phone, Natalie felt a surge of pride. For the first time in years, someone valued her for more than her role as a mother or wife. She glanced at the clock. Greg would be home soon, and dinner wasn't even started. For now, she pushed the milestone to the back of her mind, resolving to celebrate later, in her own quiet way. As Natalie continued to work, her demeanor began to shift. She carried herself differently, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Her laughter came more easily, and even her voice seemed lighter. The children noticed the difference too. "You're so happy lately, Mom," Lily said one morning, giving her a hug. Natalie smiled, her heart warming at the observation. Greg, on the other hand, grew increasingly suspicious. "You've been sneaking off a lot lately," he commented over dinner one night. "What's going on?" Natalie shrugged, deflecting with a vague excuse about volunteering at the kids' school. She wasn't ready to tell him the truth, not when she feared he would dismiss her efforts as frivolous or unimportant. In her moments of solitude, Natalie wondered how long she could keep her secret. But for now, she savored the quiet triumphs, knowing that each step she took was bringing her closer to reclaiming her sense of self. The boutique's next campaign was even more demanding than the first. Natalie spent countless hours perfecting every detail, pushing herself creatively in ways she hadn't since her college days. When the final designs were submitted, she braced herself for feedback, half expecting criticism. Instead, Laura called her within minutes. "Natalie, they're obsessed with it," she exclaimed. "They said it's exactly what they were hoping for. They even mentioned showcasing it at an upcoming industry event." The praise left Natalie speechless. She thanked Laura profusely, her hands trembling as she ended the call. The validation she felt was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. For so long, she had doubted her worth, but now she had proof that her talents still mattered. She was no longer just a housewife, she was an artist, a professional, a woman rediscovering her passion. One afternoon, as Natalie picked up the kids from school, she ran into another parent, Kara, a woman she barely knew but had always admired for her confident demeanor. They struck up a casual conversation, and before long, Natalie found herself confiding in Kara about her freelance work. To her surprise, Kara was enthusiastic. "That's amazing, Natalie. I'm a project manager at a small agency, and we're always looking for freelance designers. Would you be interested?" Kara handed her a business card, her smile warm and encouraging. Natalie accepted the card, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. Could she really handle more work on top of everything else? The idea of branching out thrilled her, but the fear of failure lingered. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized she was no longer content to live in Greg's shadow. She was ready to take the next step. Greg's suspicions reached a boiling point one evening when he came home to find the house unusually quiet. Natalie was in the dining room, poring over sketches, completely unaware of his arrival. "What's this?" Greg asked, startling her as he picked up one of her designs. Natalie froze, unsure how to respond. "It's just something I've been working on," she said carefully, her heart pounding. "Working on? You mean wasting time on?" Greg scoffed. "Is this why dinner wasn't ready on time?" His tone was sharp, filled with condescension. Natalie felt her chest tighten, but instead of shrinking under his gaze, she met his eyes. "It's not a waste of time," she said firmly. "It's important to me." Greg seemed taken aback by her defiance but said nothing more. As he stormed out of the room, Natalie sat back down, her resolve stronger than ever. She wouldn't let him diminish her again. In the days following their confrontation, Natalie felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, she had stood her ground against Greg's dismissiveness. While his reaction hadn't been supportive, it no longer mattered as much to her. She was learning to draw strength from within, to find validation in her own accomplishments rather than in his approval. Her work continued to flourish. The boutique's campaign was a resounding success, and Laura hinted that more opportunities were on the horizon. Natalie began to spend her days sketching and brainstorming new ideas while the kids were at school. She had even rearranged the dining room to serve as a proper workspace, a small but significant act of reclaiming her space. Greg noticed the changes but kept his thoughts to himself. He seemed confused by Natalie's newfound confidence, unsure of how to navigate this version of her. Though the tension between them lingered, Natalie no longer felt the need to explain herself. She was finally rediscovering who she was, and it felt liberating. One afternoon, Laura called with an exciting proposal. "Natalie, I've been talking to a larger client, a regional brand that's looking for a complete rebranding. I showed them your work, and they're interested in hiring you." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. "A complete rebranding?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "That sounds massive." "It is," Laura admitted, "but I know you can handle it." They're offering a generous budget, and this could really put you on the map. The prospect was thrilling but daunting. Natalie knew taking on such a project would mean more late nights and less time for herself. Still, the opportunity was too incredible to pass up. "I'll do it," she said after a moment's hesitation, her voice steady with determination. This wasn't just another project, it was her chance to prove, once and for all, that she was more than Greg's perception of her. The rebranding project consumed Natalie's time and energy, but she approached it with a level of focus she hadn't experienced in years. To manage the workload, she began involving the kids in small chores around the house. At first, Lily and Noah protested, but Natalie turned the tasks into games, making them feel like active contributors to the household. "Why are we doing all this?" Noah asked one afternoon as he helped fold laundry. "Because teamwork makes the dream work," Natalie replied with a playful grin. "And because Mom needs a little help sometimes." Greg, however, was less accommodating. He grew increasingly irritated by Natalie's divided attention, often muttering under his breath about how things used to be. But Natalie refused to let his negativity derail her. She was finding her rhythm, balancing her responsibilities while pursuing her dreams. For the first time, she felt like she was truly in control of her life. After weeks of grueling work, Natalie completed the rebranding project. She submitted the final designs to the client with a mix of pride and anxiety, knowing how much was riding on their approval. The response came within hours. The client loved her work and wanted to proceed immediately. Natalie's phone buzzed with a flurry of congratulatory messages from Laura. "They're over the moon, Nat. This is going to be huge for them, and for you." Sitting in the quiet of her dining room, Natalie allowed herself a moment to savor the victory. She had taken a leap of faith and landed on solid ground. Though the journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth every sleepless night. Little did she know, her success was about to intersect with Greg's world in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Greg arrived home late one evening, visibly excited. "We're unveiling a major partnership at the next company event," he announced as he sat down at the kitchen table. "It's going to be a game changer for us." Natalie listened quietly, a small smile playing on her lips. She had a suspicion about the partnership but said nothing, waiting to see how events would unfold. She had learned from Laura that the regional brand she had worked with was collaborating with Greg's company, though her involvement had been kept under wraps. The next day, Greg received an internal memo detailing the upcoming partnership. When he saw Natalie's designs prominently featured in the campaign materials, he froze. Her name was credited in bold letters, a detail he couldn't ignore. His mind reeled as he realized the woman he had belittled for years was the creative force behind the company's most anticipated project. At the company event, Natalie accompanied Greg for the first time in years, her confidence radiating as she entered the venue. The presentation began, and when her designs were unveiled, the room erupted in applause. Greg's colleagues praised the campaign, marveling at its creativity and elegance. "She's brilliant," one of the executives said, nodding toward Natalie. "Greg, you're a lucky man to have such a talented wife." Greg forced a smile, his mind spinning with conflicting emotions. For years, he had dismissed Natalie's potential, viewing her as little more than a housewife. Now, her talent was on full display for the entire company to see. As the event continued, Greg found himself grappling with a newfound respect for the woman he had taken for granted. That evening, the car ride home was tense. Greg drove in silence, gripping the wheel tightly, while Natalie gazed out the window, her face calm but unreadable. Once they were home and the kids were tucked into bed, Greg couldn't hold back any longer. "Why didn't you tell me you were working on that campaign?" he asked, his tone more accusatory than curious. Natalie turned to face him, her expression firm. "Would it have mattered?" she replied evenly. "You've spent years making it clear that anything I do outside this house doesn't matter to you." Greg flinched at her words, but he didn't deny them. I didn't expect to see your name attached to something so big," he admitted. "Why didn't you tell me you were still talented?" Natalie laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Still talented? Greg, I never stopped being talented. You just stopped seeing me. And honestly, I stopped seeing myself for a while, too. But I won't let that happen again." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Greg opened his mouth to respond but found he had nothing to say. For the first time, he was beginning to see how deeply he had underestimated her. The next morning, Natalie sat down with Lily and Noah over breakfast. "Kids, I want to talk to you about something important," she began, her voice gentle but firm. The children exchanged curious glances, setting down their cereal spoons. "I've been working on some projects lately, things I used to love doing before I became a mom. It's been a lot of work, but it's also made me really happy. I want you to know that it's okay to follow your dreams, even if it's scary or hard." Lily tilted her head. "So, does this mean you're going to work now, like Dad?" Natalie smiled. "Not exactly. I'm still going to be here for you, always. But I'm also going to keep doing what makes me happy. And I want you to know that you can always do the same." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Does that mean I can try out for the soccer team even if I'm scared I won't make it?" "Yes, sweetheart," Natalie said, leaning forward to ruffle his hair. "Because trying is the most important part." Greg overheard the conversation from the kitchen doorway, his heart heavy with guilt. For years, he had dismissed Natalie's dreams, but seeing her inspire their children made him realize how wrong he had been. Quietly, he resolved to find a way to make things right. That day, Greg stayed home from work, unable to shake the weight of Natalie's words and actions. He spent hours in his home office, staring at the walls, replaying their years together in his mind. Memories of their early days came flooding back, the way Natalie used to light up when she talked about her designs, the pride she took in her work, the way he used to look at her with admiration. He realized how far they had drifted from those days, largely because of his own actions. Somewhere along the way, he had let his ego and stress blind him to the incredible woman he had married. He had taken her sacrifices for granted, belittled her efforts, and, worst of all, made her feel invisible. Greg's throat tightened as he picked up his phone and scrolled through pictures of their family. In every photo, Natalie was there, smiling, supportive, and always in the background. It was time for him to step up and give her the recognition she deserved. A week later, Natalie received an email from Laura that left her stunned. "The boutique you worked with is hosting a professional panel next month," the message read. "They want you to speak about balancing family and creativity. You in?" Natalie hesitated. The idea of speaking in front of an audience terrified her, but the opportunity was too important to ignore. After years of feeling silenced, she finally had a chance to share her voice. When she told Greg about the invitation that evening, he surprised her by saying, "You should do it. I'll help with the kids that day. Whatever you need." Natalie stared at him, taken aback. "You think I should do it?" Greg nodded, his expression sincere. I think you've got something important to say, and people need to hear it. I know I do. On the day of the panel, Natalie stood nervously backstage, clutching her notes. When her turn came, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, facing an audience of professionals, creatives, and entrepreneurs. She began by sharing her story, how she had given up her career to focus on her family, how she had lost her sense of self, and how she had fought to reclaim it. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, she gained confidence, her passion shining through. I spent years believing my worth was tied to how others saw me, she said. But I've learned that true worth comes from within. It's never too late to rediscover who you are. The audience erupted in applause when she finished. Several attendees approached her afterward, thanking her for her honesty and courage. For the first time, Natalie felt seen, not as a housewife, but as a woman with a voice and a story worth sharing. Greg had attended the panel, sitting quietly in the back of the room. As he listened to Natalie speak, his chest tightened with both pride and regret. After the event, he waited until most of the crowd had left before approaching her. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For years, I made you feel like you weren't enough. But I was wrong. You've always been more than enough, Natalie. I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. Natalie studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity, but found none. Thank you, she said softly. I need more than words, though, Greg. I need your actions to match. They will, he promised. Starting now. Over the following months, Greg worked hard to prove his sincerity. He began taking on more responsibilities at home, allowing Natalie to focus on her growing freelance career. He encouraged her at every step, even suggesting ideas for her designs and helping her set up a proper home office. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but they were rebuilding it together. For the first time in years, Natalie felt like she had a true partner. Greg, in turn, rediscovered the woman he had fallen in love with, marveling at her strength and resilience. Years later, Natalie sat with Lily and Noah in their living room, looking through old family photos. The kids, now teenagers, asked about the days when their mom was just a housewife. I was never just anything, Natalie said with a smile. And neither are you. Remember, you can always be more than one thing. You can be anything you dream of. As Greg joined them on the couch, he placed a hand on Natalie's shoulder. Together, they had built a life rooted in respect, love, and mutual understanding, a life that honored the dreams of every member of their family.